The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, 1892. Episode 6. The Man with the Twisted Lip. Welcome back, Detective. After witnessing how the shadows of America's dark past could reach across oceans to claim the Openshaw family, you might think you understand the depths of human deception. But today's case will challenge everything you believe about identity, social class, and the masks we wear to survive. Have you ever wondered what drives a respectable gentleman to abandon his comfortable life and choose to live as a beggar on the streets? Prepare yourself for one of Holmes's most perplexing mysteries, where nothing is as it appears, and the truth lies hidden beneath layers of skillful disguise. Picture yourself on a foggy June evening in 1889, when the gas lamps of London cast eerie shadows through the opium-scented air of the East End. You're accompanying Watson on an urgent mission to Upper Swandam Lane, one of London's most notorious districts, where respectable citizens rarely venture after dark. The narrow streets teem with sailors, dock workers, and other society prefers to forget. Watson has reluctantly agreed to retrieve Isa Whitney, a friend who has fallen victim to an opium addiction that threatens to destroy his marriage and reputation. "I promised his wife I'd bring him home safely," Watson explains as you navigate the treacherous cobblestones. "But I must warn you, the opium den we're entering is no place for the faint of heart." As you approach the infamous Bar of Gold, notice how the building seems to lean inward like a predator waiting to devour its prey. The acrid smoke drifting from its windows carries the sweet, cloying scent of opium that has already claimed so many souls. Watson pushes open the heavy door, and you're immediately assaulted by a wave of nauseating smoke and human misery. Inside, the den presents a vision of human degradation that would shock even the most worldly observer. Bodies lie scattered across crude bunks, their minds lost in drug-induced dreams, while their physical forms waste away in squalid conditions. The air is so thick with smoke that you can barely see across the room, but here's where your detective instincts must be sharpest. Among these wretched souls, Watson spots something that shouldn't exist in such a place. A figure in the corner, partially hidden by shadows, possesses an alertness that seems completely out of place in this temple of oblivion. Can you guess who this mysterious observer might be? "Watson," comes a familiar voice from the darkness. "What brings you to this den of iniquity at such an hour?" To your amazement, Sherlock Holmes emerges from his hiding place, his appearance so perfectly disguised as an aged opium addict that even Watson initially failed to recognize him. "Holmes!" Watson exclaims in shock. "What on earth are you doing in this terrible place?" Holmes's eyes gleam with the excitement of a hunter who has found fresh prey. "I'm investigating a most peculiar disappearance case, my dear fellow, and your arrival may prove more fortuitous than you realize." As Watson locates the semi-conscious Isa Whitney and begins the process of getting him sobered up enough to travel, Holmes shares the details of his current case. 3 days ago, Mrs. Neville St. Clair came to me in a state of absolute desperation. Her husband, a successful journalist and family man, has completely vanished. But the circumstances of his disappearance are so bizarre that Scotland Yard refuses to take them seriously. Holmes continues, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mrs. St. Clair claims she saw her husband in the window of a building here in Upper Swandam Lane, not as a victim, but apparently living as a beggar." Think carefully about this, detective. What would drive a respectable gentleman to abandon his comfortable suburban life and take up residence in London's most squalid district? What secret could be so powerful that it would compel someone to fake their own disappearance? Holmes leads you and Watson through the maze-like streets to Bow Street Police Station, where Inspector Bradstreet has a most unusual prisoner in custody. "We arrested this fellow yesterday for causing a disturbance, but there's something very strange about him. He calls himself Hugh Boone, claims to be a professional beggar, but look at his hands. The prisoner they bring before you is a sight that will haunt your memory. His face is horribly disfigured by a twisted lip that gives him a permanent, grotesque sneer. His hair is matted and filthy, his clothes are little more than rags, and his entire appearance screams of a lifetime spent in poverty and degradation. But Holmes instructs you to look beyond the obvious. Observe his fingernails, detective. Notice how clean and well-maintained they are beneath the surface grime. Look at his teeth, Far too good for someone who has lived on the streets. Most importantly, examine his hands. Do you see any calluses or signs of hard manual labor? The evidence is subtle, but undeniable. This beggar shows none of the physical signs you would expect from someone who has truly lived a life of poverty and hardship. His body tells a story that contradicts his appearance entirely. Hugh Boone refuses to speak, Inspector Bradstreet explains with frustration. He just sits there making those horrible guttural sounds and writing messages on scraps of paper. But here's the strangest part. The messages are written in perfect English with excellent handwriting. Holmes examines the prisoner with intense scrutiny, searching for clues that will unlock this human puzzle. Mr. Boone, or whoever you truly are, I know you can understand every word I'm saying. Your disguise is remarkable but not perfect. Small details always betray the truth. The breakthrough comes when Holmes notices something extraordinary. Despite his grotesque appearance, the prisoner's eyes show an intelligence and alertness that seem completely incompatible with his supposed station in life. More importantly, when Holmes mentions Mrs. St. Clair's name, those eyes flash with unmistakable recognition and concern. Mrs. St. Clair is waiting at home, consumed with worry about her husband's fate, Holmes says deliberately, watching the prisoner's reaction. She has 3 young children who cry themselves to sleep each night, wondering if their father will ever come home. At this mention of children, the prisoner's carefully maintained facade begins to crack. His hands tremble slightly, and you can see genuine anguish flicker across his disfigured features. The mask of Hugh Boone is beginning to slip, revealing the man beneath. Holmes presses his advantage. I know who you are, Mr. St. Clair. The question now is whether you'll continue this charade and allow your family to suffer, or whether you'll find the courage to face the truth about what you've done. The transformation that follows is one of the most remarkable reveals in Holmes's career. With soap, water, and a sponge provided by Inspector Bradstreet, the horrifying beggar Hugh Boone gradually disappears. The twisted lip proves to be nothing more than skillfully applied makeup and wax. The matted hair is revealed to be an elaborate wig. Standing before you now is Neville St. Clair, a well-dressed, respectable gentleman who looks nothing like the monster he had pretended to be. But the shame and desperation in his eyes tell a story of how far a man can fall when financial pressures drive him to extraordinary measures. How did you know? St. Clair asks Holmes in defeat, his voice cultured and refined, nothing like the guttural sounds Hugh Boone had made. Holmes's explanation reveals the brilliant deduction that solved this seemingly impossible case. Several clues betrayed your true identity. First, Mrs. St. Clair's description of seeing you in the window matched Hugh Boone's general build and height. Second, your hands showed none of the wear expected from a lifetime of begging. Most importantly, Hugh Boone's earnings were far too substantial for a typical beggar. The financial records Holmes discovered tell an incredible story. Hugh Boone had been earning more money through professional begging than many respectable tradesmen made through honest work. His twisted appearance and strategic positioning in high-traffic areas had made him remarkably successful at extracting sympathy and coins from passers-by. It started as a joke during my university days, St. Clair confesses with deep embarrassment. I was researching an article about London's begging community and decided to try the disguise myself. In one afternoon, I made more money than I earned in a week of journalism. When financial troubles threatened my family's security, I convinced myself it was only temporary, he continues, his voice breaking with shame. I told my wife I was traveling for work while I spent my days begging in the East End. The money was too good to give up, but I became trapped in a double life that consumed my soul. The moral complexity of this case challenges everything about Victorian society's rigid class structure. Is it worse to beg honestly while poor, or to beg dishonestly while middle class? St. Clair's deception was driven by love for his family, but it required abandoning every principle he claimed to value. Holmes's judgment is characteristically practical rather than moralistic. Mr. St. Clair, your method was dishonest, but your motive was love. However, you cannot continue living this double life. Your wife deserves the truth, and your children deserve a father who doesn't disappear into the shadows of London's underworld. The resolution comes when St. Clair agrees to abandon his Hugh Boone identity permanently and return to his legitimate career as a journalist. The substantial savings he accumulated through begging will provide his family with the financial security he had been seeking, but earned through means he can never be proud of. Inspector Bradstreet agrees not to press charges in exchange for St. Clair's promise to never resume his begging career. This case has shown me that desperation can drive good people to extraordinary deceptions. But society cannot function if everyone abandons their true identity when faced with hardship. The case concludes with a profound meditation on identity, class, and the masks we all wear to survive in society. St. Clair's reunion with his family is joyful, but tinged with the knowledge that trust, once broken, requires time and effort to rebuild. Holmes reflects on the broader implications. This case demonstrates that appearances can be so thoroughly deceptive that we must always look beyond the surface to find the truth. A man's character is not determined by his clothes or his social position, but by his actions when faced with impossible choices. Years later, Holmes would receive occasional letters from the St. Clair family, reporting on their gradual healing and Neville's successful return to journalism. The man with the twisted lip had found his way back to respectability, but the memory of his double life served as a permanent reminder of how thin the line can be between desperation and deception. So tell me, detective, did you suspect that Hugh Boone was not what he appeared to be? What does this case teach us about the social conditions that drive people to such extreme deceptions? And how do we balance understanding for St. Clair's motives with judgment of his dishonest methods? This fascinating mystery reminds us that identity itself can be a mask, and that sometimes the most dramatic transformations happen not through magic, but through the simple human need to survive in a world that offers few options for those who fall between social classes. Join me next time as we investigate The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, a Christmas mystery where a stolen gem, a goose, and a hat lead Holmes through a labyrinth of London's holiday traditions to solve one of his most charming cases.